on Nintendo, GameCube, Nintendo,
Game genres are dumb. For some, this is pretty well known. Action-adventure means absolutely nothing to consumers, and even in terms of creative ambitions. RPGs can be categorized from what region they were made, but we unanimously don't call Demon's Souls a JRPG, despite it being made in Japan. Some genres, like Metroidvania, are solely based off of old, established titles and say nothing, while other genres are named after camera angles. The main problem is that the conventions we use to define game genres is taken purely at face value, like hack and slash, as if there are no other redeeming qualities to that type of game, while also suggesting that the gameplay is borderline mindless. Now, there are a few genres that do work thanks to the inherent simplicity that the name implies, like sports, racing, or simulator games. But there are other genres that make sense due to their cultural landscape, and we have a deep-rooted understanding of the connotations that come with the genre, such as survival horror. But the problem doesn't stem from what we call the genres and how we apply them, but rather how we construct the genre in the first place. Genre in film or television use the techniques of the medium to build and portray good themes and motifs, which then help define the genre. Techniques like a film's edit, pacing, camera work, mise-en-scene, and structure all help to give the audience a specific experience. So action has pretty distinct pacing in film, mostly with anywhere up to 3 to 4 spectacle scenes and a huge sequence for a finale, slowly ramping up in intensity, thanks to the snappy yet bodacious edit. These sequences are what we remember them for, but how's it done, and for what purpose? Well, action films commonly touch on themes involving power dynamics, and these themes are commonly connected to how the film is shot and edited. So something like a lone person that overcomes a powerful entity, or a rebellion against a societal leader, these can be seen through the techniques of the medium, which then play in that power relation, building the motifs. Which, okay, that's a lot to unpack in itself, but let's keep going because this is important. See now, look at how a powerful character is shown in the frame. Usually a lower angle will let them fill more of the frame, getting up close in your face to establish control. Even editing techniques are laid out to emphasize moments of danger. A giant explosion can be over in a second, but these editing techniques show the explosion more and more with drawn-out cuts, which make the scene seem like a spectacle and weighty in terms of how the protagonist responds to it. Now, genre is such a complicated topic that scholars in academia have discussed it for decades. I've just kind of compacted years of research and lectures into about a minute, but the main point that I'm trying to emphasize is that genre is built from the techniques of the medium. Science fiction is much, much more than just a movie set in outer space. Horror is much more than it gives me the spooks. They can overlap, and different techniques can be used to emphasize a single idea. It is more than face value, and we need to give games the same treatment, which is easier said than done. Video games are a vastly more complicated medium in comparison to film. The mere introduction of player agency and the effort on the game's world completely flips how you define techniques, making it even harder to pin down distinct motifs and themes. So, remember how we talked about conventions in action films being defined by power relations and the sequences that act as a spectacle? Those film conventions don't work for games at all. All sorts of games ranging from Super Mario to Bayonetta play with power relations. And games by design have sequences created for the protagonist to make their way through. Literally any game with a boss fight works like this. Let's look at a game like Halo, which relishes and is filled to the brim with classic sci-fi themes. What it means to be human, the banality of evil, technological reliance, interstellar colonialism, the fear of the other and the unknown, it all works narratively. But a game has much more than narrative to work with. Just like how the Terminator is shot with a low angle to make him seem intimidating, a game's mechanics need to be interwoven into the experience, not just in the story, but how the player interacts with the game. The hard part comes from understanding how those mechanics create an experience which interweave together with the themes in order to form engaging interactions for the player. So in terms of Halo, let's look at a common sci-fi theme as an example. Technological reliance. This is a core science fiction motif, and it is all over Halo. Protect Cortana, Master Chief being an augmented human to the point where he is basically treated like a weapon, the Covenant's religious relationship with Halo, the dichotomy with 343 Guilty Spark's cold logic. But how do these things translate mechanically? Level design-wise, there is a reliance on things like light bridges, protective cover, overshields, using the aliens' tech against them, both with their own weapons and infiltrating their ships. Mechanics like the shield system make the player rely on it, since your actual health will deplete too fast when you're in a skirmish. As a player, when your shield is down, you need to choose between finding safety or finishing the fight. So right there, even mechanically and how the player interacts with the game, there is this reliance on technology. There is then a complement to this theme with the contrast of the Flood, which are an entirely organic but still relentless threat. You see that they are learning how to use technology, using weapons and organizing themselves in military formation. So even things like Halo's enemy design and placement, it hammers down this idea in the player's head. If they learn how to utilize powerful technology, things are gonna get messy. Boom! That's good theming and good science fiction. But obviously it isn't always so easy. There are so many different mechanics, themes, and ways they can all interact with one another. And even then, we are only looking at how mechanics help the themings of genre, but not all games have a dependency on storytelling. Games are a medium of experience. Experience is reliant on hundreds, if not thousands, of individual factors. It is borderline impossible to categorize and assess everything a person can do or feel. Games can be methodical, they can be disciplined, turbulent, expressive, filled with solidarity. They can be thoughtful, cautious, dazzling, terrifying, energetic, vigorous, calming, contemplative, and compelling. A game can be an absolute thrill ride, but it is important to understand what, how, and why it's thrilling. Is it the mechanical pacing, aspects of animation, enemy and encounter design? Look at the nuances of every little piece. A small tweak like Bayonetta being able to cancel an attack by dodging completely changes how a player approaches a situation in battle, making action sequences seem like a huge spectacle, and they feel so intense for the player. But here is the harsh truth that comes with these specific complications. There is no concrete answer for game genres, at least not yet. And even then, it isn't 100%. But at least we can try. So hear me out. 007 GoldenEye is an action film, but it is not an action game. It's a first-person shooter. So even though these two share very similar themes, they're separated because of the game's mechanics. So what about other first-person shooters? Overwatch? Medal of Honor? Doom? They all play very differently, but why? What about Portal or Superhot? Both games involve shooting and are in first person. Heck, there's even exploration of similar themes. But we also know that Portal and Superhot are first-person puzzle games. But what about Amnesia? It's a first-person puzzle game, but it's also a horror. Why not throw some roguelike elements in there for the AI? How about giving the player an RPG leveling system? I'm sure you see what I'm getting at here. Video games have so much depth, but the way we categorize genres is ostensibly simplistic. There's more to a game than just their mechanics. We need to look at their structure. What I mean by structure is the architecture that gives the mechanics context. So let's compare the shielding in Wind Waker and Dark Souls. Both games, you can put up your shield and you don't take damage. Simple. But there are some differences that change the entire experience. Dark Souls has a stamina system, so if you get hit, the player has something to lose. Multiple enemies will attack you at once way more often in Dark Souls rather than Zelda, so things like shield stun will have way more risks attached to it, including things like getting pushed back and falling to your death, instead of grabbing the ledge like a smarty. So both games have shielding, but there are other factors outside of the shield that create two very different experiences. So how does this apply to genre? Well, let's rewind a little. So what about other first-person shooters? Overwatch, Medal of Honor, Doom? They all play very differently, but why? Yeah, why? There isn't much arguing that these games are shooters, right? Well, let's look at the structure of their mechanics. So let's say that Overwatch is a team-based objective shooter because it's built more on team synergy and how other characters interact with one another. I would say that Medal of Honor would be a wartime shooter, which emphasizes tactile cover for survivability, complemented with accurate iron sights. It isn't really a game where you run and gun, unlike Doom, which I would call an arena shooter. It has very open level design, fast-paced movement, and a torrent of enemy encounters. And every match feels like that I'm in a coliseum of some kind. It's great. So all of these games are shooters, but they're slightly different because of their structure. But even then, it still isn't a 100% end-all answer. Remember, genre and subgenres are fluid, but so are a game's mechanics. A game's mechanics are the backbone and core part that we interact with. So yeah, it naturally makes sense to categorize these games that are mechanically similar. But mechanics are a tool of the medium, and there are so many ways that mechanics and systems can be used to tell different stories, construct different sequences, draw the player in, and envelop them in an experience. We need to not just identify a game's mechanics, but also their structure and how it builds the distinct experience, as opposed to pointing at just the game's mechanics. As games are evolving, mechanics are getting twisted and expanded upon. It wasn't too long ago that titles like Gone Home or Proteus were questioned about their validity of even being called a game. Games are defying genre before genre is even defined. So with more experimental projects coming out that make us question the definition of a game, we still have a lot of growing pains to go when it comes to structuring a reliable genre format for the medium. There are so many mechanics that can be reshaped, and some that aren't even created yet. What we need isn't a unified agreement on how genres should work. What we need is discussion. Concepts within game design can seep into the gaming cultural landscape to bring awareness and insight in order for video games to grow. There isn't an end-all, be-all answer to this problem because we aren't finished writing the question. Play more games. Think about what they do and why. Think about the context and how much further aspects can be pushed. If something's in a game, ask why and for what purpose. Think about the techniques of the medium. Be sure to come back when we explore how to create a mechanical spectacle next time inside the Game Design Archive.
Nintendo, GameCube, Nintendo.